So on Sunday, the second round of the Brazilian election finally happened, and the center-left candidate Lula, who is of course a previous president himself and immeasurably popular politician ever since, beat the pathetic little fascist Jair Bolsonaro by a pretty comfortable margin, 50.90% to 49.10%. Of course, it was projected to have been a lot bigger of a win for Lula, but hey, we'll take whatever we can get at this point. It still is a pretty big win, for all of the very many faults that Lula has. For example, he supported the UN invasion of Haiti in 2004, and compared to some other South American leaders, he is kind of milquetoast a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's very different to be a politician like him in South America than it is to be some social democrat in Europe or something. Because the social democrats in Europe, there's a reason why they are largely against people like Lula, people like, Chavez, Kirchner, these sorts of leaders. Even though on the face of it, they might seem kind of similar due to their, domestic policies of wealth redistribution and stuff. And there's a pretty simple reason for that. It's that their so-called social democracies depend on the exploitation of countries like Brazil, of South America, of Africa, of huge parts of Asia, etc. Whereas so-called social democracy in Brazil and in other places is quite different, because it's much more about reasserting national sovereignty and regional sovereignty against the exploitation of those sorts of European social democracies, so that instead of the country's wealth being redistributed to Europe, it's more redistributed to the country itself. So fundamentally, we're not talking about the same sort of thing here. I've seen some complete idiot liberals from Europe, etc., posting memes and stuff where it's like, oh wow, these people love social democracy in Latin America, but they criticize it in Europe. And yeah, because, well, one of these so-called social democracies, for one, that term nonsensical. I'll talk about that later in another video. Kind of reductive terminology in both of these cases. But for two, it's much more of a question of exploiter versus exploited than anything else. But anyway, so getting back to the actual course of events following Lula's win in the election. So there was a long silence where Bolsonaro just didn't speak, basically. And that caused a bit of alarm, but it's also better than him speaking, isn't it? So after he didn't speak for like 2 entire days following the elections, which were on the last Sunday, he came out and he didn't acknowledge defeat, but he did sort of tacitly acknowledge that there was going to be a transition to a new government, which, is as close to acknowledging defeat as you're going to get, from him at least. He's just a proud little baby. Previous to that, he apparently locked himself in his room and didn't speak to anyone, like a child having a tantrum, which is about what you expect from someone like him. Then after that, there were protests of truckers. Now, I don't know what it is with the truckers in Chile and Brazil, but apparently they are quite reactionary. Maybe someone can explain that to me, because if you didn't know, in the 1973 CIA-backed coup in Chile, the famous Pinochet coup against Allende, a core part of that was CIA-funded trucker protests, where truckers came out and, blocked the roads to try and overthrow the left-wing government. And this is happening now in Brazil too. A bunch of truckers putting up roadblocks all over Brazil to try and ask to overturn the election results. And so Bolsonaro, this guy who was like this massive, big, strongman fascist beforehand, who was heavily implying that he wasn't going to accept defeat in the elections, that he would call it fraud or whatever. He goes on TV and he sort of like meekly asks very nicely his supporters to please stop blocking the roads. And yeah, that's kind of interesting, isn't it, right? It really seems like in the end, the guy kind of got further than he would have even really expected to get in terms of his political career, and now he just kind of wants to go and enjoy all of the properties and all of the wealth that he's accumulated from his time being the president of the country in quiet, and he's just not really cut out so much for these politics things anymore. He's not fighting for it. He's just like, well, guess I lost. He's obviously not going to admit that publicly due to the whole pride thing. But it's pretty fucking funny to see him just telling his supporters, stop blocking roads. I lost the election, basically. He didn't actually say the last part, but he kind of implied it. You couldn't possibly imagine Trump ever saying anything like that. And Trump is the guy who had tried to sort of model himself off. So kind of interesting there. All in all, though, obviously this is better than him, trying to incite a rebellion or something. But it's just kind of interesting how much of a paper tiger he really turned out to be in the end. So yeah, Brazil looking to have a brighter future than it did a week ago. That's always a good thing. Please, Lula, don't intervene in Haiti again. It is very important in Latin America, particularly in big countries like Brazil and Argentina, to have governments that, they might be sort of capitalist, perhaps even a little bit neoliberal, but at the end of the day, the fact that they will sort of be vocally against a lot of US foreign policy, European foreign policy goals in the region, and be much more about regional solidarity is overall immeasurably important. Because at the end of the day, the biggest problems in Latin America, as they always have been, are the landowning agricultural oligarchs who are very closely aligned with the US and who rely on them very much to maintain their grip on power. And this sort of regional solidarity that sort of works to reduce US influence throughout the region is very necessary if their grip on power is ever going to be meaningfully challenged. I also saw very hilariously people complaining that Lula has bad opinions on Ukraine. Like, why doesn't he oppose the Russian invasion outright? Why doesn't he follow the US foreign policy line and stuff? And it's like, why would he? That's so fucking funny. It's like Ukraine full-throatedly deep-throating the US imperialism. You have Zelensky praising Israel every 2 seconds. You have Zelensky voting to maintain the US embargo on Cuba in the UN, one of only 3 countries to do so, along with the US and Israel. And that's apparently all well and good. But Lula says one thing that might possibly be taken as pro-Russia, because obviously for a Latin American left-wing leader, it's incredibly fucking important to be allied with Russia, China, etc. And maybe not outright allied, but at least be on their good side against the US, which is a far more immediate threat to you than they will ever be. And that automatically disqualifies you. It's like, man, Ukraine's not the only issue in the entire world, okay? It doesn't fucking matter to people in Brazil what's happening in Ukraine. What matters to people in Brazil is what the US is going to do to them. That's always what matters. It's what matters in Brazil, it's what matters in Argentina, it's what matters in Uruguay, in Peru, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Paraguay. Every country in the Americas is far more concerned with US imperialism, okay? If anything, Russia and China help them against this. So, get fucking real for a second here. It's like you have fucking Lula, who I'm pretty sure lost his thumb due to torture by the dictatorship. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I don't remember particularly. I don't particularly care either, because he was still imprisoned by the US-backed right-wing anti-communist dictatorship in Brazil, and we have evidence indicating heavily that the US literally just 4 or 5 years ago were directly collaborating with the far-right prosecutors who put Lula in jail as a part of false corruption allegations against him. Bolsonaro came to power thanks to the US State Department working in tandem with right-wing judicial operators in Brazil to put him in jail and to put many other people, to ruin their reputation, to put them in jail in some cases, etc. If you're a Brazilian left-wing politician and you're not anti-US, you're not trying to curry favor with China and Russia, you'd be doing your people a disservice, honestly, because you'd be making it far more likely that you're going to end up being overthrown in some way, shape, or form by the US and their local allies. Russia or China aren't going to be undertaking coups, judicial or otherwise, in Brazil anytime soon. That much is certain, okay? But yeah, that's about all that I really wanted to say here. Just wanted to cover the election, get a video out on it. Yeah, sort of give you guys a bit of a quick rundown and cover some of the stupid talking points that I've seen regarding the subject during the last week or so. Oh, and it's really funny, by the way, to see American liberals celebrating this as their victory or something, when Americans and American liberals, as I said, were fundamental to the rise of Bolsonaro. The only reason why Biden acknowledged Lula's victory so quickly is because Bolsonaro is an embarrassment to them now. Because at the end of the day, they support his politics. They just don't support his rhetoric. They don't support the fact that he doesn't put on the nice guy charade that every other politician is expected to. They'd be happy with fascism if it came in an ex-businessman wearing a suit who went to etiquette classes. They're not happy with it when it's Bolsonaro who gives the entire game away every single time he opens his mouth. That's all there is to it. So yeah, that's all I have to say on that matter for now. See you guys some other time. Bye.